I'm going to just introduce our moderator. Kendall Fitch is a third year of the joint degree between the business school and the Kennedy School. She's graduating in a few weeks after having spent some time with us. And Kendall is also a George Fellow this year, and she volunteered for this duty in part because she has a little bit of history with the Gates Foundation. I'll let you talk a little bit about that. So thank you both, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you. I will. So in 2008, I was working at the Gates Foundation at the time of the launch of what is now Post-Secondary Success. It's an initiative there that is focused on improving college completion rates for low-income young adults. And I just met with my old colleague, Josh Garrett, this morning.
Great. Very good.
The program is still doing very well, so that was exciting. That's why I have the honor to be up here today. I'm very excited about it. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
I'm going to start with your bio.
Okay.
A quick introduction, and then we'll give you some time for remarks. We'll do a bit of a moderated session, and then open it up for Q&A for most of the discussion. Great. So Jeff Raikes is the CEO of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I think you all knew that. As such, he leads the foundation's strategic priorities and its efforts to promote equity for all people around the world. Before joining the foundation in 2008, Jeff was a member of Microsoft's senior leadership team. He joined Microsoft in 1981, overseeing applications marketing strategy. In his last role, he served as president of the Microsoft Business Division, where he oversaw the Microsoft Business Solutions Group. Jeff is a Nebraska native and holds a BS in Engineering Economic Systems from Stanford University. He and his wife, Tricia, are founders of the Raikes Foundation and active members in United Way of King County, where they've served as co-chairs of fundraising campaigns in the past. I'll turn it over to you.
Great.
For some opening remarks.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks, Kendall. Thanks to all of you for being here. I guess this is like reading period. So you're sacrificing your reading. So I'm sure that's a big sacrifice. So I'm very appreciative of the opportunity to spend some time. And I primarily want to get the opportunity to, address your questions and comments. So I look forward to that. As Kendall mentioned, I came from business, but I actually thought maybe it'd be a little interesting to say a little bit about my story, and hopefully there's some useful things from my own learning. When I went to Stanford University, I thought what I would do was change the world through agricultural policy. My intent was to go work for the USDA, having grown up on a farm in Nebraska. My family are still farmers. One of the things my dad taught me, and one of the things I want to encourage all of you on, is that it's great to have a plan, but be open to opportunity. My brother was an agricultural economist, professor at Iowa State, came home to run our family farm. It was the year of the beginning of the personal computer industry. I bought an Apple II computer. I taught myself how to program it. I wrote farm accounting and farm analysis software, and here I am. It was a little bit of a different plan than I originally had, but it was an amazing opportunity. I think there are a few things from my career that were really important. I mean, obviously starting at Microsoft when we had 100 employees, and when I left we had 91,000. So I saw a lot of high growth. My last job, I was leading the business division. It was about 17,000 employees, about 31 billion in revenue. Had a lot of fun. But, how many of you use Microsoft Office? Okay, see, there wasn't anything else for me to do. So I decided to go into philanthropy. One of the things that I loved about my Microsoft experience, I mean, in the early years it was creating Microsoft Office. I mean, that was cool. But actually, the thing I got addicted to was working with high energy, high horsepower people, smart, passionate people who wanted to change the world. And that is just addictive. And I'm sure it's part of your experience here at Harvard. The fact that you get exposed to those kinds of students and faculty and others every day is just an amazing experience. And so in terms of my transition to the Gates Foundation, it may seem that it was more complicated or bigger decision than it was, but effectively the Gates Foundation gave me the opportunity to work with a lot of very smart, very passionate people who really wanted to change the world. It was just through a different means than high technology. although it can involve some high technology like what Josh is doing, it's a broader set of things. And so part of the fun for me has been to apply what I learned from business in an appropriate way. Because not everything I learned translates into philanthropy, but learn what or take what I've learned and try and apply an appropriate way in order to raise the level and quality of philanthropic impact that we aspire to. So, you know, maybe I should stop there and kind of turn it over to how you want to do the questions.
Great, sounds good. Well, I think we'll start with a bit of a softball question.
Okay.
So now that you said you went from 100 to 90,000 employees, I don't think the scale of the foundation might not have grown quite as rapidly, but it's grown quite quickly. So can you talk a bit, since you joined in 2008, that's about right when I was leaving. Can you talk?
Was there a correlation?
Certainly not. But could you talk a bit about sort of the scope and the scale of the foundation's work today? What areas are you in?
Okay.
Is it going to continue to grow, or sort of reach an ideal size?
Yeah. Well, so the foundation, I would say the last decade of the Gates Foundation has very much been one of high growth. Just take the last, 6-7 years, the foundation has quadrupled. It was about 250 employees, probably roughly 1.2 billion in annual payout. It's now over 1,000 employees and about 4 billion in annual payout. So clearly there's been a lot of growth in the last decade. And a big part of what I try and do is bring the sort of structure, processes, approach that will lead to greater capacity for impact. Our structure, for all of you, is that we really work in three distinct areas, or we think of them as three distinct areas: global health, global development, and the U.S. program. Global health is largely focused in on trying to reduce the infectious disease burden in the developing world, especially for young children. It's still stunning to me to think that there are roughly 8 to 9 million kids each year who die under the age of 5. The largest group, I'm sorry, am I doing something wrong in terms of the, it's okay. Yeah, the largest percentage of those kids are dying in the developing world of preventable diseases. And, the way I think of it is equity. Take vaccines. Our kids grow up having access to life-saving vaccines. And why shouldn't those kids have the access to those vaccines? Probably 40 to 50% of those deaths could be prevented just by more effective use of vaccines. About, of those 8-9 million kids, about 3.6 million or so die in the first 28 days of their life. Neonatal mortality. 98% of those deaths are in the developing world. 2/3 of those deaths are due to preterm birth, birth asphyxia, or sepsis, severe infection. These are things that we figured out how to take advantage of in the rich world. Why shouldn't the developing world have access to those capabilities? So, that's the kind of thing that we work on in global health. And back to working with smart, passionate people who really want to change the world. I mean, that's a great example. Another thing that I think is important is there's roughly 1.2, 1.3 billion people in the world who live in extreme poverty. That is a definition of people who are living on $1 or less per day. Now, about 65 to 75% of those people live in rural areas. That means they're dependent on subsistence agriculture. So what could you do to transform the productivity of smallholder farm families so that they would be able to feed themselves, that's food security, so that they would have enough surplus to have a little bit of income to educate their kids, to be able to have access to health interventions and other things that would really change their lives. So that is the focus of our global development program: agricultural development, financial services for the poor, water, sanitation, and hygiene. And in the U.S. program, I think we focus in on on education, because the mission of the foundation, and I should have said this up front, the mission of the foundation is to enable all people to live healthy and productive lives. You know, Bill and Melinda's founding principle was all lives have equal value. But these issues of equity that I just described to you show that the world does not operate delivering on that principle. So we dedicate ourselves to what can we do to make a difference in that way. In the U.S., the big inequity, we believe, is access to quality education. I found it stunning. When I came to the foundation, I had no idea that roughly 30% of our kids in the U.S. do not graduate from high school.
30%?
That's embarrassing.
30?
Okay, of those who do graduate from high school, we believe that roughly 1/2 of them are prepared to succeed in college. Okay, so now we're talking about a third. We're in the 21st century. I mean, we talk about the information economy, the knowledge economy. We talk about most of the job growth being with bachelor degree or better education. Yet those are our education statistics. You know, it's just not acceptable. And so, you know, I think one of the things I find motivating for myself is to think about those numbers and really understand what we as a society need to do to make a difference. And so the U.S. program is largely taking on this issue of how can you transform U.S. public education in a way that would significantly change that and open up opportunities to then increase the number of post-secondary credentials, which is the program. So, sorry, Kendall, a long description, but founding principle, mission of the foundation, 3 divisions, roughly 25 program strategies, all the way from eradicating polio to U.S. high school education.
Sounds great. It also sounds like you're now getting to be a farmer a little bit. You might have,
Finally, after all these years, I'm getting back to ag policy.
Sounds good. With that, why don't we talk a little bit about the purpose of philanthropy, as you see the purpose. Every once when I was working at Gates, I think it was actually Josh who mentioned this, that one way of thinking about philanthropy is as the venture capital of the public sector. And I know that really resonated with me. I like that idea. You try to identify really great opportunities, you support them financially and you know, sort of administrative assistance as well, if possible, with the hope that those proof points then might get adopted in the public sector and be able to be brought to scale, or you know, reallocate public dollars for more efficient uses. Is that happening now, or what do you?
Well, first of all, I think you need to step back a little bit. I actually think philanthropy is quite a broad area, and you have to, and I think one of the things that is missing from philanthropy today is to be very intentional about the various aspirations for impact, the various operating models, etc. You know, I might almost think of it in terms of segments. I'd say one segment of philanthropy is charity. There's not necessarily a theory of change in that segment, but what you're doing is you're using your resources to try and fill in gaps in society that make a difference for people. That's goodness. And, you know, whether it's supporting United Way or other activities, or supporting scholarships. A second segment of philanthropy, I would say, is organization building. You as the philanthropist don't necessarily own the theory of change, but you're betting on an individual, an organization, a social entrepreneur who does have a theory of change. Saul Khan Academy. He has a theory of change, and many people are betting on Saul. They're investing in his organization. I call that segment org building. The third segment is the one that you referenced, which I call catalytic philanthropy or strategic philanthropy. But I think it's important to understand there are multiple segments of philanthropy. They're all good. I actually think the Gates Foundation participates in all 3 of the segments, as does the Raikes Foundation. You know, my wife and I have our own private foundation. And I think in catalytic philanthropy, Kendall touched on what I consider to be one of the most important points. We're big believers in the private sector. Capitalism has been an effective system to allocate resources in society to produce goods and services. It works especially well when there's a clear market opportunity and there is a risk opportunity for the capitalist to make an investment, to undertake the development of something innovative and then reap the benefits of that reward. It does not work well when there's not a market opportunity, sometimes described as a market failure. Public sector is also very important. The public sector allocates resources to produce goods and services for society, but is less inclined to take risk. After all, it's your tax dollars. So in the private sector, you'll have risk takers. In the public sector, not as much risk taking. We think the sweet spot for catalytic philanthropy is to identify those areas of quote-unquote market failure, or where the public sector is not going to make the initial investment, to take the underlying risk of investing in innovative interventions that will address an issue. Maybe it's neglected infectious diseases in sub-Saharan Africa. No market opportunity, those are poor people, yet big societal benefit if you can invent the vaccines or the medicines or the other medical interventions that will make a difference. So as a social, as a catalytic philanthropist, if we undertake that risk, that social risk, provide the underlying evidence of efficacy against those problems, so that then you can encourage either a private sector and or a public sector scale up of those. Because while the Gates Foundation is viewed as a big philanthropy, the truth is, even at $4 billion, it's a small percentage of the overall resources that we're working on. Our U.S. education investment is less than 0.1% of the overall spending on U.S. education. So if we're going to have an impact, we have to think as a catalyst. So how can we develop the evidence of successful interventions that then prove worthy of allocating public sector dollars or reallocating public sector dollars in order to scale up and have a greater impact? Or can we prove that the use of mobile phone technology and age of banking will transform the underlying economics of banking to where it will lower the overall costs and make it feasible for poor people to have a safe place to save their money? That would be a scale-up strategy for the private sector, probably supported by the public sector. So that three-legged stool, private sector, public sector, catalytic philanthropy, I view as the sweet spot of what we're trying to do with the Gates Foundation.
Thank you. I'll describe that to people in a much more thorough way. Sure.
Well, you did a good job.
And could you talk about what are the skill sets and the qualities of the people that you want to surround yourself with in this mission? What are you looking for when you're thinking about the team that you're going to build, whether it's in the private sector or the public sector?
Yeah, well, early on in my Microsoft career, especially in the 1981-82 era, we were doing things that hadn't been done in computing, just because the personal computing industry was new. So if I made it a point to go out and hire experience, I wouldn't have found anybody. Plus, I was 23 years old. I wouldn't have even known what to look for. So early on, and I got great coaching from a Harvard alum named Steve Ballmer, who hired me at Microsoft, that the key things I really needed to focus in on were three qualities. The first two were high energy and high horsepower. High energy basically means people are passionate about what they do. And I look for whether their eyes light up when they talk about something that is really important to them. You know, high horsepower means that they're smart, they learn. It's not necessarily, I'm not a huge believer in sort of the whole, IQ test type of thing. I'm looking for street smart. I'm looking for people who learn and learn quickly from their experiences. Because we were doing a lot of things that hadn't been done, so we were going to have to learn. In my first 2 years, I did a lot of MBA recruiting from Harvard, Stanford, MIT. I had some great hires, but I learned in a couple of cases that I could hire really smart people, very energetic. They'd work a lot of hours, but they didn't get anything done. So then I added a third quality. High energy, high horsepower, and they know how to get things done. I look for a results orientation. So You know, you've all benefited a great deal from your education here at Harvard, but frankly, the most important thing I would look for if I was asking, you know, if I was interviewing today, I'd be looking for those three things. Now, depending upon the role, you may look for a certain set of experiences or a certain set of value set. If somebody wants to come to the Gates Foundation because of the aura of the Gates Foundation, yeah, that's a little dangerous. And we have that problem, you know. I want somebody who really is going to kind of dig in and get the job done. And it's hard work. I mean, it was even as hard as it was to build Microsoft Office, it is much harder to figure out how to effectively reinvest resources back into society that will really make a difference for societal good. And so I just think it's really important that I get people who are willing to sign up for that tough mission.
We'll turn it over to student
Okay.
questions now.
Thanks very much. Actually, it's a great follow-on from what you just spoke about. My name's Joel. I'm a grad student here. And from the perspective of graduating students and just generally people who are looking to go into not-for-profit sectors, we see something very peculiar going on. That we're told public service and that what you're doing is important, but most not-for-profits are only hiring people with corporate experience increasingly, and they want management consultants to come in after they've done their 5-6 years at McKinsey or an equivalent and then come in. One of the big challenges that due to that, a lot of not-for-profits have to pay them quite excessively, and it's staff salaries lower down the tree, making it basically unsustainable for people to move on if they've made impacts in education. You've got this self-fulfilling circle. So my challenge to you as a hirer and a CEO of one of the largest foundations in the world is how do you break the cycle and actually make internal growth and not-for-profits something that graduates from sort of universities want to go into rather than just being sucked into other parts just so that they can get the experience to go back out later.
Yeah, two things. One is I'm going to disappoint you, Joe, in that I actually don't see the world the same way as you do. I don't actually see that cycle in quite the same way. But on the other hand, I do think we may generally agree that a variety of skill sets and experiences are quite valuable. So, and there are different ways to get that. You know, I frankly find that most people I encounter in philanthropy and nonprofits have not had business experience. And I actually think not everyone in the nonprofit sector should have business experience, but I think some private sector experience is quite valuable, and I'm actually excited to see a little bit of dialing that up in the philanthropy sector. So, you know, I think back to your point then about what role the Gates Foundation should play. I'll just tell you how we go about it is that we, in terms of both our hiring and our compensation, what we'll do is we'll look at various roles that we need to fill, what set of skill sets and experiences that we need, to what extent their compensation would be defined in a nonprofit world, to what extent it would be in a for-profit world. We do a blending of that depending upon the role in order to make sure that we do it well. And generally speaking, the nonprofit compensation is substantially lower than the for-profit compensation, and I actually think that's not a good thing. You know, I'm an outlier case. You know, I took an 87% pay cut to come to the Gates Foundation. Didn't matter to me, but for other talent you might want to bring in to the nonprofit sector to do this good work, basically asking them to take 75% pay cuts or 50% pay cuts, I think actually sub-optimizes the access to the talent you'd like having working on these problems.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for being here with us. My name is Sushma, and I'm a dual degree student between the Harvard Kennedy School and the Kellogg School of Management. And I, just linking off of your last response, I in some ways might be one of the groups of people you're talking about. I spent 10 years in the nonprofit sector, founded 3 nonprofits, and now gone to business school, and I'm trying to pick up skills from different sectors. My question for you was about some trends I've seen within philanthropy and the emergence of impact investing. I spent last summer with the MacArthur Foundation and with some folks here at the Kennedy School as well. And there's been a push towards moving more and more of the endowment of foundations towards mission investing and removing the Chinese wall, let's say, between endowments and grant making. What's interesting is foundations like yours and the MacArthur Foundation and the Ford Foundation, you have aggressive investing programs, but they're mostly the PRIs, the program-related investments, whereas the smaller foundations, from my understanding, have been aggressively pushing for more and more of their endowment to be mission investments. I was really comforted by your remarks earlier, talking about the role for charity. And so I'm just wondering what your position is on this trend towards mission investing, and what leadership role do you find organizations with the endowment size that you have doing in terms of exercising leadership?
Yeah, well, it's a great question, Sushma, and you're correct in that at the Gates Foundation, we tend to focus in on PRIs. For all of you, that refers to program-related investments. That's within our Gates Foundation operating budget. It's like making a grant, except that you're using a debt instrument or an equity instrument. There's some potential return of the capital. A lot of times it's used with private sector companies that you're trying to get to invest in a nonprofit activity. Now, Sushma makes the point that we have a separate investment company that manages our investments. And so there's the question, to what extent should we try and ask the investment company to make investments that they may feel are a less than market return given the opportunities they see, versus do the best they can to maximize the return within certain parameters, and then have greater resources to deploy to the Gates Foundation. We chose the latter path. For the most part, we don't do that former thing, which is called mission-related investment. That's not to say it's not a good thing. It's just to say it's a different choice of how to get to the goal. In our case, we think we'll have the greater societal good by appropriately maximizing the return of the endowment, by having the investment company be focused on that, and then deploying those resources to the Gates Foundation activities. Other foundations make different choices. I actually think another very interesting approach is what Omidyar Networks is doing, where only 50% of the capital of Omidyar is really focused within private foundation, and the other 50% is outside. It's not even an endowment, because Pierre believes and Matt Bannock believes that what they can do is they can make investments in organizations that will produce great societal good and a return. I think that's great. I think they have a good model. Doesn't happen to be the model for us. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Mark. I'm an alum and currently direct a special project of Rockefeller Philanthropy Advisors. My question actually was going to be related specifically to PRIs, but since it happened to be already asked, I'll ask a different question related to energy. I'm curious, I mean, you have a number of different program areas focused on health, focused on education. Have you looked at energy either through the lens of those programs or perhaps as a separate program, both on the renewable side, which I think there's a lot of interest and focus on, but also on the energy efficiency side? Because I feel like this energy efficiency is this giant sort of 800-pound gorilla in the room that's invisible that most people don't see.
Yeah.
We're wasting hundreds of billions of dollars in energy we don't need to be consuming. And I'm wondering if you've looked at sort of either program-related investments in that area or grant-making in that area to sort of address those issues.
Yeah, it's it gives me the opportunity to make 2 points. One is, Bill and Melinda and I believe very strongly in the importance of focus. And so it's very easy to, it's almost an oxymoron to say that we focus on 25 areas. And so right now I'm not looking to add the 26th. On the other hand, we do consider energy to some extent within our programs, but actually the biggest energy work by far is done by Bill outside of the foundation. Bill thinking about energy policy, he's on commission sponsored by President Obama with Jeff Immelt and others who were thinking about those issues. And so for Bill and Melinda, that's been their choice of how to take on issues of energy. Thanks.
Hi, my name is Josh Harder. Thanks so much for coming. I've actually had the opportunity to work on a number of Gates projects in East Africa and elsewhere, and I'm a huge admirer of the foundation. My question goes to a comment you made earlier about the transition between the business sector and the philanthropic foundation. Obviously, a lot of backgrounds of past heads of the Gates Foundation have been from global health and other sorts of backgrounds, and not necessarily strictly business. So my question for you would be, which skills specifically did you find did not translate going from business to philanthropy, and what surprised you that you would not have expected about that transition going in 2008?
Well, it's interesting. I'm going to take the second one first. My native personality is to ask a lot of questions. And so I'm very inquisitive, and when I was offered and accepted the job to be the CEO of the Gates Foundation, I started asking people, how should I think about philanthropy, and what approach, and it's really different. You have to think different. Well, what suggestions would you make? Think differently. And and so my mind, which races a little bit at times, it's just like, wow, I got to think differently, So the number one surprise that I had coming into the Gates Foundation is that I had swung my mind so much to the notion that I had to think differently that actually I found it wasn't as different as I thought it was going to be. Look, we were at that time a 750-person organization that had tripled in the previous 3 years. As I mentioned, I was at Microsoft during the high-growth era, so I've seen the kind of mistakes that get made or the kind of problems that occurred, and sort of how the processes begin to break down or need to be invented, so on and so forth. All of those things were there at the Gates Foundation. And so a big part of what I think I've done in my first 3.5 years is taken advantage of what I learned from business and figured out how to appropriately apply it at the Gates Foundation. One of the most common things you'll hear, was it Josh?
Yes.
One of the most common things you'll hear, Josh, is that in philanthropy you don't have a market system, so therefore you don't have the market signals for improvement, and that's really different from business. That's true. I'm a board member of Costco. Costco gets to look at their daily sales results and so on and so forth. Yet on the other hand, most of my career I worked in long-term R&D, where I had products under development that weren't actually out in the market. And when you have projects like that, you have to have a disciplined mindset to set a goal, to use various types of various types of non-market metrics to gauge your progress, so on and so forth. And that's a lot of what we have to do in our work. It's a lot of long-term type R&D. And so even that, where people said it was going to be so different, it is different, but maybe not as different as people would think. I have encountered some differences in the culture, and there are some good things about that, and there are some negative things. And this is just not the culture of the Gates Foundation, the culture of philanthropy, and it goes a little bit like this. Kathy, isn't it great that we're here at the Gates Foundation, working together to change the world? Isn't that great that we're here together? And of course we'll agree on how we should work together to change the world. There's sort of this nicey-nice consensus thing sometimes where people don't want to mix it up. And that's actually really dangerous for effective philanthropy. The kind of problems that we're taking on, like eradicating malaria, these are like 40-year goals where people don't really know what the solution is. So here's a rule of thumb for you. The bigger the goal and the more ambiguous the solution, the more important it's going to be to get a rich set of intellectual dialogue, a diverse set of inputs to come together and to figure out what that solution will be. And if you're worried about offending your colleague because you might have a different point of view, that is suboptimal for the kind of culture that is necessary. There was much more of a comfort level of mixing it up at Microsoft than I've seen at the Gates Foundation. And I'm not going to defend some elements of Microsoft culture either, but I am going to say that I think it's important that we figure out the right way to make sure that people speak up, share their points of view, have that rich intellectual dialogue. A lot of why I'm here in Boston is not just to be here at Harvard, but to engage with people who are critical of our education work, because I want to learn from them. I want to understand their point of view. I think it might make our work better, and in any case, I think it'll help us explain our work better. That has to be central to what we do, and that's something that you do in business. You watch competitors. You understand what their strengths are and what their weaknesses are. Similarly, we have to understand who our opponents are, what they're thinking, why they might be right, why they might be wrong, what that will do to make us better on behalf of the people we want to serve. Thank you.
That's just a great setup to the question I want to ask you. My name is Mark.
I'm on a roll on that.
Yeah, you are. It's a great role. And I work at the Harvard Decision Science Laboratory, which is part of the Center for Public Leadership. I'm also on the board of a startup that does food security work with farmers in East Africa. But the question that I have for
Which
you,
countries?
Tanzania and Kenya.
Okay.
But the question I have for you is about decision making. So I work here with a lot of scientists who study human decision making. And what they teach us is we all have a lot of cognitive biases. We know what they are. We can study them pretty carefully. We understand how emotion, how our neuroendocrine system move us off the path of rational thinking. We know a lot about that. We are not good at building ways of protecting ourselves against those things in the decisions we make. So my question is, at a place like the Gates Foundation, where what you do is make decisions, do you think about how you make decisions?
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a systematic way of reflecting on your decision-making process? And do you also work with your grantees to have that conversation and get them better at the decisions they make? And if so, how?
Yeah, I'm going to disappoint you a little bit, and I think that the work that we're doing on decisions is the most basic work. Like, who's going to make the decision? And when are they supposed to make it? It actually relates to the thing I was saying earlier, where I was leveraging Kathy. And I was saying kind of, let me frame it this way. Whenever you go into a new organization, listen to the funny phrases that people use. It's indicative of the culture of the organization. Like one of the phrases I heard people talk about was overly collaborative. And I said, overly collaborative, what does that mean? And the lady said to me, well, what it means is that we don't know who's going to make the decision, but we know that everybody's going to want to be involved in making the decision. And well, that's not a healthy thing. You do want to be caught, because I'll tell you what happens is that you learn with these kinds of behaviors, these kinds of values, there's the unintended consequences, there's the counter measure, and I'm sure you think about this in your line of work. So what is the counter on overly collaborative? I don't want to involve Kathy, because Kathy might disagree with me. And if our culture is such that we're supposed to agree, then it's better just not to involve her. And so then you don't get the collaboration. And so that's the dichotomy of overly collaborative. It drives people to not collaborate. And so that's one of the things I've really been working with people on, is just getting, my theory is if you just get clear about who's going to make the decision, who's going to provide input, who's not going to provide input but needs to be informed, what time frame the decision is going to be made, we just call this hygiene. Just cleaning things up so you get that level of clarity. If you have that level of clarity, then it actually will improve the decision-making processes and operate on this overly collaborative problem, because then I'll feel comfortable asking Kathy, because even if I get her input, I don't have to make her happy. I can just go ahead and I appreciate the input, but I've made a different decision, and this is why. I want to bring one other thing that I think is super important in philanthropy and not well understood. change management. There's a whole world of discipline around change management, the processes of change management. And I actually find change management hard in the Gates Foundation, which is a little scary because we've grown rapidly. We've got to improve our processes. That means we need to make changes. We need to be appropriately collaborative. We need to have the appropriate rigor. That means we have to make changes in our behavior. So we have to be really good at change management in order to be the best we can be. But even more important, we have to have that skill and discipline in order to appropriately serve the ultimate consumer of our work. Because it's all about them changing behavior. So I don't know what you're doing with smallholder farmers in East Africa, but I'm almost certain it involves aspects of them changing their behaviors. And the level of discipline in change management, in the understanding of that and the focus on that in philanthropy, it might be there more than I see, but I certainly don't see it very much. So I aspire to have our organization be excellent at change management internally and externally, so that we can better support the people who will benefit from our interventions. So thank you.
Just gonna follow quickly on that. So I believe part of your question was also saying, how do you incorporate grantee feedback into decision making? Is that correct?
Are you teaching
And I think that I thought the Gates.
That's one of my aspirations, but I'd say we're just at the very early days. The question was, are we teaching grantees about change management? I think we have to do more on that. Your question was a little different.
Incorporating grantee feedback into decision making in the foundation. While I was there, I thought that you guys did an excellent job of that. So maybe you could speak a little bit about how you incorporate that feedback.
Yeah.
I think you go above and beyond.
What Kendall may be referring to is that we did an excellent job of surveying the perceptions of our grantees with their relationship with us. And frankly, what we did an excellent job of is understanding that we weren't nearly as good as we needed to be. And a lot of it goes back to just being focused and intentional. A good portion of our grantees, we've grown so rapidly, a good portion of our grantees didn't know who their primary contact was at the Gates Foundation. That's just a basic thing we needed to clean up and fix. More importantly is that we needed to do a little bit better of an orientation process when they were coming on board as a grantee, so that we were mutually clear on how the grantee management was going to work. And so there were just a set of things like that we had to do to improve our approach. And we're still working on that. The ultimate aspiration is you really have to think of your grantees as your partners, that you're working together to achieve that ultimate impact. And that means you have to have that rich intellectual dialogue, not only internally, but externally with the partners. And I think that we have to be better at that.
Okay, thank you for the talk. My name is Layla. I'm a mid-career student. And it's actually following a bit Mark's question, but I'm thinking in terms, well, of course, I don't underestimate the importance of charity programs like for vaccinations and malaria and all this. But how much of a role would you say does the Bill Gates Foundation have in some preventive issues that are really a big concern for the world that reproduce health problems? For example, some of like spiritual emptiness and unemployment are leading actually to militarization and I would say destructive religiousness in the world. So how much sustainable, empowering programs is the foundation thinking of? So it's again thinking of visions and values in the foundation, I guess.
Yeah, well, I think that those domains are extremely important. But it goes a little bit back to my question on focus. There are things that we are good at, and there are some things that actually other organizations are going to be good at or better at. And we tend to be better at things that involve underlying science and technology, like how can you produce a more cost-effective pneumonia vaccine. And we are probably less good at some of the things that you raised. I'm just thankful that the culture of philanthropy, especially here in the United States, encourages philanthropists to pursue their passions. And so there are organizations that focus in on those areas, and that's goodness. That's what the world needs. Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for your talk. I'm Myra Batchelder, and I'm a mid-career student. This is tricky. Absolutely. I'm a mid-career student here at the Kennedy School, and I've spent actually the past 11 years working in sexual and reproductive health nonprofit organizations on the national and international level. And I was very excited about Melinda Gates' recent TED Talk on family planning and the unmet need, and as well as the No Controversy website that was created. And I was wondering about the Gates Foundation's plans in this arena, and if they're planning to really focus in on the unmet need for contraception moving forward.
The answer is yes. We have had a focus in on family planning, and in particular, the support for the unmet need for contraception. Part of what we have done is work on R&D that would improve either in particular the cost equation on existing alternatives, because the cheaper it is, the more that you can supply, but also some new contraceptive approaches, like non-hormonal approaches that may be important in certain areas. But in addition, trying to understand how we could make how we could support improvements to the delivery systems that would increase the access. Because as Melinda pointed out, a good portion of it can be just the stockouts in the supply system. The good news is the UK government is getting significantly behind this, as they did a year ago with vaccines in Gavi. And so I anticipate some major announcements where a number of countries, both donor countries and developing countries, are going to come together with an aspiration to significantly try and close some of the unmet need for contraception, which is estimated at this point in time in the range of 200 to 225 million women of reproductive age. So it's a very, very important issue. In some respects, if we collectively wanted to have a big impact on reducing environmental consequences long term, just giving women access to what they want to plan their families, to space the births, would have a huge impact on population growth. Not so much in the near term, but in the 15, 20, 30-year range. Why not so much in the near term? It just takes time if you look at population demographics. But that means it's all the more urgent to get after it today. And we hope that we can effectively communicate that message this summer.
At the meeting in London.
Correct, July 11th.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, thank you so much for being here. My name is Catherine, and I'm an MPP1 here, originally from Kentucky. My question is about the role of advocacy within the Gates Foundation, specifically for public policy. I know Dr. Sanford, I think, had set up an...
Say it again, the role of what?
Oh, advocacy for public policy.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm excited that an HKS alum is in that role. I'm wondering, though, if for the Gates Foundation, it's just a matter of scaling up the solutions that you all have proven to be effective, or if it is also about convincing policymakers to adopt solutions that we already know are effective. And either way, my second question is, has the Gates Foundation considered creating a 501c4 branch that is free of some of the legal restrictions that traditional nonprofits face around lobbying?
Yeah. And I'm sorry, was Michelle? No.
Oh, that's my sister's name, but I'm Catherine.
And this is Dr. Sandra, better known to us as Stephanie. So she can give you the real rundown. Two things. One is, if you think about what I was saying earlier on catalytic philanthropy, advocacy is very important, because effectively what you want to do is you want to use a base of evidence to appropriately influence public sector resource allocation to scale up and sustain the interventions that have the base of evidence of their efficacy. So advocacy is a very important part of what we do. There are times where I might suggest to you that if you're doing an evaluation of the assets of the Gates Foundation, the voice of the foundation and Bill and Melinda and our leadership might actually be an even greater asset than the financial resources. I think, and that puts a lot of pressure on us to make sure that we're really clear about the evidence, that we're really pushing on the right approach and so on and so forth. And it's tricky because we also have to, if we're going to have the impact that we talked about earlier, we have to take some risk. And so you got to be clear about, you have to take smart risks, you have to be clear about what you're trying to learn, so on and so forth. But advocacy is an important part of what we do for that reason. The 501c4 is an interesting approach, and we haven't chosen to do that at this time. I wouldn't preclude it for the future, but frankly, we feel that we can get done most or all of what we want to do by being within the bounds of the regulations for a 501c3. You know, we don't feel like we have to go out and advocate for specific candidates or specific legislation. What we can do is we can share the base of information that policymakers need to have more informed decisions and get done what we need to do. That, you know, we might think of that evolution in the future, but that's not something we've decided to do at this time.
Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine.
My name is Ginti Miho. My question is about effectiveness of aid. I worked in an area where Joseph Kony, who became recently notorious, worked. And for over a year, it was very difficult for us to raise funding, even though the atrocities were 10 times worse than now. At the same time, we see in other places that there are thousands of NGOs, 2,000 or 3,000 in places, Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. So my question is, and this comes back as a complaint from beneficiaries everywhere we go. How much of your time do you spend in the places where people live that you are trying to help? And if you don't spend enough time, how do you ensure that report writing that has become perfected as a technique does not blind your eyes? Thank you.
The last part?
How do you ensure that report writing that has become a perfected technique does not blind your eyes to see effectiveness of aid? Thank you.
No, great question. The whole area of aid or foreign assistance is a very, very complex one. Let me give a few key comments. To your last point, the key thing that we do is to very carefully select which grantees that we work with. We make sure that we have a good relationship with them. We travel a lot. There's a part of that you might say is quote unquote checking up on the grantee, but I like to position it a little bit better than that, because it is better than that. That's a very important thing that we do. The other thing that you have to keep in mind about our work is a lot of times what we're doing is we're developing broad horizontal interventions, like a new vaccine, that other organizations are then taking. And so we also work with organizations like Global Fund and Gavi, and we pay a lot of attention to what they're doing to ensure the effectiveness. And there are some times where the assistance doesn't end up where you want it to be. You know, if you pay $100 to vaccinate kids and only $80 gets spent on vaccinating kids, you're disappointed. $20 went someplace you didn't want it to go. $80 went to vaccinate kids. And so I always want to balance, you know, are we headed in the direction that we need to be? The other thing I want to say about foreign assistance is a broader point. There are some people who have criticized foreign assistance, folks like Dambisa Moyo. And I think it's very important to have a more nuanced discussion of foreign assistance. I think there's no question, I think we can all agree there's some foreign assistance that's not very smart. It was politically motivated in ways that didn't have the intended impact. Maybe it was trying to buy friendship or something. There is foreign assistance that is very smart. I can tell you very definitively, for every $1,500 you cut out of foreign assistance for vaccinating children, a child will die. That is the epidemiological estimates that have been gone over and over and over. And so there is, in my view, smart aid, and there is not so smart aid. And what we have to do is to be committed to smart aid, and we have to, as you suggest, effectively use our relationships with our grantees, donor partners, developing country partners in order to ensure that it's effectively used. And it's not an easy job, but it's an important one. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Lynn Fine. I'm a first-year Master of Public Policy student. Thank you for being here. And what I wanted to ask is for you to speak a little bit to how you involve kind of civil society organizations, people from the nonprofit sector, from the public sector, in the formulation of larger program strategies, especially considering how much work is done in developing countries.
Yeah, I'm sorry, how we involve the partners in that?
Yeah, kind of in the larger processes of determining, program priorities, the types of programs that would be most effective for different regions, for different types of areas, and how much of that feedback is really taken into account when you do kind of on a larger, broader scope define your program area.
I'll give you a little bit of a case study. Essentially what we do is very much like what I would have done in business. I make sure that a team has the right aspirational goal, and that's iterative. I make sure that they put in place a clear strategy that includes a theory of change, an action plan. Theory of change is what is it that's going to make a difference and get you to that aspirational goal. Action plan is what are you going to do. The delta between the two is what your partners are going to do, because it's the work of your partners plus you that add up to the theory of change. And then we get into a rhythm where we do an annual review of our execution against that strategy, and then probably every 3 to 5 years we've learned enough where we have to make major adjustments to the strategy, and then we do a strategy refresh. So that's just the process that we're in. It's not unlike what I might do if I were running a given type of business. As part of doing both that strategy development, strategy refresh, our best teams basically develop that aspirational goal in conjunction with a set of advisors. Some of them might be potential grantees, but actually most of them are not. Most of them are independent thinkers. You take, for example, our maternal neonatal child health team. When I first came into the foundation in 2008, they were trying to get their strategy completed and approved, and they had a set of advisors that included universities like Johns Hopkins, partners on the ground in the developing world, and they put that body of evidence together into developing a strategy that was intended to work in 3 areas: northern Nigeria, Ethiopia, and 2 of the poorer states in India, to understand neonatal mortality and figure out the set of interventions, in particular frontline health work that would make a difference on that. And so that was something that they had to it's an intellectual challenge where you have to dissect that step by step using good input from a range of partners and then ultimately your grantees. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Shloka and I'm a grad student here. Thank you so much for being here today. My question had to do with, or rather it's my understanding that the Gates Foundation is more proprietary and confidential in their approach to IP development, as opposed to the rest of the developments that are just more open source. So I was wondering if that was the case, and if so, why that might be.
No, I wouldn't necessarily describe it that way. It depends upon what your benchmark is. If you compare it to academia and how people publish, how long it takes them to publish research, I don't think there's any difference there. Let me just say, I think it's super important that we be transparent about the work that we're doing. I think it's important that we share our strategies. I think it's important that we share what grants that we're making. If you go up to our website, you can see what grants we've made. If you go, you can see what our strategy definitions are for each of those 25 areas. I think that level of transparency is very important because it's a part of the intellectual dialogue that we have. Are there things I think we can do to be even better at that? Sure. But for the most part, I actually think we're pretty good. And it's not about our desire to protect proprietary intellectual property. In fact, that's probably more the interest sometimes of the grantees. But generally, we have provisions that information has to be shared in order for it to inform better practices. Thank you.
Hi, thanks for being here. My name is Adam. I'm a student at the Graduate School of Education just across the square.
Sure.
Last night we got to hear from Hillary Pennington, which was nice. This is from my week of Gates. Before I came here, I was at New School's Venture Fund, where I got to spend some of your foundation's money on education reform, so thanks for that as well.
You're welcome.
Earlier you referenced what I wanted to ask you about. You referenced coming to Massachusetts to hear a little bit of the criticism of the foundation's work in the education space, and so I wanted to give you a chance to talk about this. And specifically, I think some of the feedback that I've heard in working in this sector is some people are worried about the implications on the democratic institution of public education with big philanthropic dollars coming in. And so I wanted to ask you maybe a question about sort of how does sort of the ethics of democracy play into a foundation as large as Gates or in a public space, and maybe even if there's differences in how you work domestically and sort of the ethics of working in foreign countries with different regulation regimes.
Yeah, well, on that latter point, I think the principles really are the same. We are not only regulated by U.S. law, but we hold the same values and principles wherever we operate. So that I think is fairly important. To your question about the democratic process and the appropriate voice of philanthropy, I think it's super important that we carefully approach our role in the dialogue. I mentioned earlier that we are a small percentage of the overall spending in U.S. education, and that is true. It's less than 0.1%. On the other hand, some people would say we have a disproportionate voice in and how things are influenced, and we feel that that's a very important responsibility that we hold, and that's why a key part of what we have to do is to seek input about how people are viewing the goals. Some of the critics, well, let me actually set a context, and I was chatting with David Gergen about this. It's really unfortunate that the whole dialogue around many things, but especially U.S. education, has become so polarized. I mean, what we collectively can and should care about is student outcomes, and we believe in teaching. We think teaching is a very important profession. It's critical to economic development. It's critical to democracy. And we think public education is critically important. We are not about privatizing education. We don't think that we don't support vouchers. We don't believe that charter schools are the answer. We think they may be part of the answer, but they're actually publicly funded in a way to try and improve practice. And so I think the thing that really has got to happen is we've got, as a society, we have to have more of a appropriate discussion of what is working, what isn't, what is the evidence of those successes and failures. And so I'm spending a lot of time with our team here learning about the evidence, understanding the criticisms of the research, seeing where we would need to tune or not. And I just think that's a part of us representing that principle, that we have to hold our role in this process to a very high standard. Thanks, Adam.
Hi, my name is Livio, and I'm a student from Italy. I'm here at the Kennedy School. And I was reading this article about when Bill Gates went to Chad and he was working in these rural clinics bringing vaccination. And he was saying there is these women that were working like 7, 8, 9, 10 hours to get to this rural clinic to get this vaccination. So my question is like, how do you improve access to vaccine? How do you expand the access? Do you go about improving cold chains, or do you go about having technology that can improve the stabilities of vaccine, which is the approach?
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. I was actually with Bill in Nigeria right before he went to Chad, so I had a lot of opportunity to discuss those issues with him. That was in the context of Nigeria. And what we were doing is we were looking at the challenges of the polio program in northern Nigeria, and then the problems with polio and other vaccination in Chad. Chad has one of the lower routine immunization coverage rates in the world. Livio, you have to work on a combination of things. You have to have the vaccines available. You have to have frontline health workers with the training to be able to deliver the vaccine. You have to have the supply chain, including the cold chain, to get the vaccines to there. You can make things better. The more that you can have vaccines be needle-free, the easier it is for them to be administered or taken orally. The more that you can use develop thermal-stable vaccines. One of the things that we think about is how do you get consistency in the packaging of vaccines so that it makes it simpler at that frontline health post. I mean, if you require special refrigeration for different vaccines, that makes it complicated because it's packaged differently. So it's a very rich intellectual challenge to work on. But as I mentioned earlier, extremely important. Because for every kid we can get vaccinated, you dramatically increase the ability to save their life.
I follow up 1 second because I asked you that question because we saw that was a big problem. So we started, our dean always asks us, what can we do, what can we do? So we work on a project. So
I should have asked you the answer.
Yeah, right. So we've developed this project that basically can deliver vaccine, like thermostable vaccine, and is a platform technology. And we won the business plan competition at Harvard Business School, and then I go and check, the Melinda Gates Foundation, and basically it seems that the developing thermostable vaccine is not a priority. So I was thinking, what is their approach in either going about putting the cold chain in place everywhere, or either investing in technology. So then I was just very curious about that.
No, we're somehow there's a misimpression there, maybe because of the things we have on the website. But we do work on thermal stability. Sometimes the issue is just when will the thermostable vaccine be available, and then you get into what's the most efficient solution. Is the most efficient solution to figure out how to improve the cold chain for the types of vaccines that are available today, or to get the thermal stable vaccine. Unfortunately, for a lot of the thermal stability, as I recall it, it's out in the future, and we've got problems to solve today. So that may have been where the misimpression came from.
Thanks.
Thank you.
I think we only have time for maybe one last question. If it's very quick, Olga. Very quick.
Sure. Hello. Thank you so much for being here. I'm Olga. I'm also a joint degree student with the Kennedy School and Business School. And I'm curious to hear about what's next for the Gates Foundation. What do you see as the big opportunities and challenges for growth? And also additionally in the space of foundations and philanthropy.
Yeah.
Great question.
Great. Yeah. Well, and it actually relates to a question, Kendall, that you asked that I probably didn't completely answer up front, which is, what do I see ahead? In the past decade, there's been huge growth. And one of the consequences of significant growth that you see in business, and I've also now seen it in philanthropy, is that you tend to get siloed. And that's because when you're trying to grow rapidly, the organizational strategy is typically to figure out how to segment the overall organization and its priorities, and then tell leaders to run as fast as they can in order to go deliver on that. And that is a good thing in that it delivers on the growth, but it's a challenging thing in that it also tends to create some silos. So one of the most significant initiatives we have underway right now under my leadership is called Global Redesign, where I'm trying to restructure the way in which we work on our global programs in order to break down some of those silos, increase the collaboration. I make that symbolic of what I think the next 10 years are going to be like. The next 10 years will not grow the way the last 10 years did. I mean, it's almost obvious, but I'll just state it. We went kind of from 0 to 4 billion. I think, we might end up increasing 10, 20% over a decade, who knows, but it's not going to be that kind of significant growth. So what that means is this decade, I think, will be very much characterized by great stewardship. What can we do to increase our capacity for impact with the resources we have? And that's where I think some of my skills and discipline are contribution, because I think about how do you run the processes, how do you ensure that you have the best relationships with grantees, et cetera. If you can take the same resource and increase your capacity for impact by 7% per year, I'll just use that as a conceptual number. You'll double your capacity for impact in 10 years. It's just the so-called rule of sevens. If I could figure out how we could increase our capacity for impact 10% per year, we double in 7 years. And so that doesn't mean we double our resources. It means we double our capacity for impact by being more effective in how we do our work. And I'm very committed to that, working with the team to do it. And I've been very honored to be here at the school. I thank you very much, and I thank all of you for what you do. I hope you follow your passion and go out and change the world. Useful things from my own learning. When I went to Stanford University, I thought what I would do was change the world through agricultural policy. My intent was to go work for the USDA, having grown up on a farm in Nebraska. My family are still farmers. One of the things my dad taught me, and one of the things I want to encourage all of you on, is that it's great to have a plan, but be open to opportunity. My brother was an agricultural economist, professor at Iowa State, came home to run our family farm. It was the era of the beginning of the personal computer industry. I bought an Apple II computer. I taught myself how to program it. I wrote farm accounting and farm analysis software, and here I am. It was a little bit of a different plan than I originally had, but it was an amazing opportunity. I think there are a few things from my career that were really important. I mean, obviously starting at Microsoft when we had 100 employees, and when I left we had 91,000. So I saw a lot of high growth. My last job, I was leading the business division. It was about 17,000 employees, about 31 billion in revenue. Had a lot of fun. But, you know, how many of you use Microsoft Office? Okay, see, there wasn't anything else for me to do. So I decided to go into philanthropy. One of the things that I loved about my Microsoft experience, I mean, in the early years, it was creating Microsoft Office. I mean, that was cool. But actually, the thing I got addicted to was working with high energy, high horsepower people, smart, passionate people who wanted to change the world. And that is just addictive. And I'm sure it's part of your experience here at Harvard. The fact that you get exposed to those kinds of students and faculty and others every day is just an amazing experience. And so in terms of my transition to the Gates Foundation, it may seem that it was more complicated or bigger decision than it was, but effectively the Gates Foundation gave me the opportunity to work with a lot of very smart, very passionate people who really wanted to change the world. It was just through a different means than high technology. Although it can involve some high technology like what Josh is doing, it's a broader set of. Bill and Melinda's founding principle was all lives have equal value. But these issues of equity that I just described to you show that the world does not operate delivering on that principle. So we dedicate ourselves to what can we do to make a difference in that way. In the U.S., the big inequity, we believe, is access to quality education. I found it stunning. When I came to the foundation, I had no idea that roughly 30% of our kids in the U.S. do not graduate from high school. 30%? That's embarrassing. 30? Okay. Of those who do graduate from high school, we believe that roughly 1/2 of them are prepared to succeed in college. Okay, so now we're talking about a third. We're in the 21st century. I mean, we talk about the information economy, the knowledge economy. We talk about most of the job growth being with bachelor degree or better education. Yet those are our education statistics. You know, it's just not acceptable. And so, you know, I think one of the things I find motivating for myself is to think about those numbers and really understand what we as a society need to do to make a difference. And so the U.S. program is largely taking on this issue of how can you transform U.S. public education in a way that would significantly change that and open up opportunities to then increase the number of post-secondary credentials, which is the program. So, sorry, Kendall, a long description, but founding principle, mission of the foundation, 3 divisions, roughly 25 program strategies, all the way from eradicating polio to U.S. high school education.
Sounds great. It also sounds like you're now getting to be a farmer a little bit. You might have,
Finally, after all these years, I'm getting back to ag policy.
Sounds good. With that, why don't we talk a little bit about the purpose of philanthropy, as you see the purpose. I heard once when I was working at Gates, I think it was actually Josh who mentioned this, that one way of thinking about philanthropy is as the venture capital of the public sector. And I know that really resonated with me. I like that idea. You try to identify really great opportunities, you support them financially and
I'm going to just introduce our moderator. Kendall Fitch is a 3rd year of the joint degree between the business school and Kennedy School. She's graduating in a few weeks after having spent some time with us. And Kendall is also a George Fellow this year, and she volunteered for this duty in part because she has a little bit of history with the Gates Foundation. I'll let you talk a little bit about that. So thank you both, and thank you all for coming.
Thank you. I will. Yeah. So in 2008, I was working at the Gates Foundation at the time of the launch of what is now Post-Secondary Success. It's an initiative there that is focused on improving college completion rates for low-income young adults. And I just met with my old colleague Josh Garrett this morning.
Great. Very good.
The program is still doing very well. So that was exciting. That's why I had the honor to be up here today. I'm very excited about it. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
I'm going to start with your bio.
Okay.
A quick introduction, and then we'll give you some time for remarks. We'll do a bit of a moderated session, and then open it up for Q&A for most of the discussion. Great. So Jeff Raikes is the CEO of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. I think you all knew that. As such, he leads the foundation's strategic priorities and its efforts to promote equity for all people around the world. Before joining the foundation in 2008, Jeff was a member of Microsoft's senior leadership team. He joined Microsoft in 1981, overseeing applications marketing strategy. In his last role, he served as president of the Microsoft Business Division, where he oversaw the Microsoft Business Solutions Group. Jeff is a Nebraska native and holds a BS in Engineering Economic Systems from Stanford University. He and his wife, Tricia, are founders of the Raikes Foundation and active members in United Way of King County, where they've served as co-chairs of fundraising campaigns in the past. I'll turn it over to you.
Great.
For some opening remarks.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks, Kendall. Thanks to all of you for being here. I guess this is like reading period. So you're sacrificing your reading. So I'm sure that's a big sacrifice. So I'm very appreciative of the opportunity to spend some time, and I primarily want to get the opportunity to address your questions and comments. So I look forward to that. As Kendall mentioned, I came from business, but I actually thought maybe it'd be a little interesting to say a little bit about my story, and hopefully there's some things. And so part of the fun for me has been to apply what I learned from business in an appropriate way, because not everything I learned translates into philanthropy, but learn what or take what I've learned and try and apply in an appropriate way in order to raise the level and quality of philanthropic impact that we aspire to. So, maybe I should stop there and kind of turn it over to how you want to do the questions.
Great, sounds good. Well, I think we'll start with a bit of a softball question.
Okay.
So now that you said you went from 100 to 90,000 employees, I don't think the scale of the foundation might not have grown quite as rapidly, but it's grown quite quickly. So can you talk a bit, since you joined in 2008, that's about right when I was leaving. Can you talk?
Was there a correlation?
Certainly not. But could you talk a bit about sort of the scope and the scale of the foundation's work today? What areas are you in?
Okay.
Is it going to continue to grow, or sort of reach an ideal size?
Yeah. Well, so the foundation, I would say the last decade of the Gates Foundation has very much been one of high growth. Just take the last 6-7 years, the foundation has quadrupled. It was about 250 employees probably roughly 1.2 billion in annual payout. It's now over 1,000 employees and about 4 billion in annual payout. So clearly there's been a lot of growth in the last decade. And a big part of what I try to do is bring the sort of structure, processes, approach that will lead to greater capacity for impact. Our structure, for all of you, is that we really work in three distinct areas, or we think of them as three distinct areas: global health, global development, and the U.S. program. Global health is largely focused in on trying to reduce the infectious disease burden in the developing world, especially for young children. It's still stunning to me to think that there are roughly 8 to 9 million kids each year who die under the age of 5. The largest, I'm sorry, am I doing something wrong in terms of the, it's okay. Yeah, the largest percentage of those kids are dying in the developing world of preventable diseases. And, you know, the way I think of it is equity. You know, take vaccines. Our kids grow up having access to life-saving vaccines. And why shouldn't those kids have the access to those vaccines? Probably 40 to 50% of those deaths could be prevented just by more effective use of vaccines. About, of those 8-9 million kids, about 3.6 million or so die in the first 28 days of their life. Neonatal mortality. 98% of those deaths are in the developing world. 2/3 of those deaths are due to preterm birth, birth asphyxia, or sepsis, severe infection. You know, these are things that we figured out how to take advantage of in the rich world. Why shouldn't the developing world have access to those capabilities? So, you know, that's the kind of thing that we work on in global health. And back to working with smart, passionate people who really want to change the world. I mean, that's a great example. Another thing that I think is important is there's roughly 1.2, 1.3 billion people in the world who live in extreme poverty. That is a definition of people who are living on $1 or less per day. Now, about 65 to 75% of those people live in rural areas. That means they're dependent on subsistence agriculture. So what could you do to transform the productivity of smallholder farm families so that they would be able to feed themselves, that's food security, so that they would have enough surplus to have a little bit of income to educate their kids, to be able to have access to health interventions and other things that would really change their lives. So that is the focus of our global development program: agricultural development, financial services for the poor, water, sanitation, and hygiene. And in the U.S. program, I think we focus in on education, because the mission of the foundation, and I should have said this up front, the mission of the foundation is to enable all people to live healthy and productive lives. You know,